the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 760. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we feature our interview with Jonathan Hensley, founder and CEO at Emerge. Jonathan and I talked about digital transformation and engagement. The core boils down to people and alignment. This was an extremely refreshing interview. Let me know what you think. Jonathan Hensley is co-founder and CEO of Emerge, a digital product consulting firm that works with companies to improve operational agility and customer experience. For more than 2 decades, Jonathan has helped startups, Fortune 100s, technology leaders, large regional health networks, nonprofit organizations, and more transform their businesses by turning strategy, user needs, and new technologies into valuable digital products and services. Jonathan writes and speaks about his experience and insights from his career and regularly hosts in-depth interviews with business leaders and industry insiders. He lives in the Pacific Northwest with his wife and 2 boys. Are you ready to get aligned? It's time for the interview. Jonathan Hensley, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thank you so much for having me, Tom.
Jonathan, it is rare that I get to talk to not only a founder, but a founder and CEO. You're the founder, CEO of Emerge. You're also an author, too. I mean, what haven't you done, by the way?
I definitely like to keep myself busy.
Understood. Before we dive into the nuts and bolts, I'd actually like to ask you a question that actually troubles me occasionally. Troubled me this morning in a different conversation with a client. The whole idea of like digital products and its cousin, digital transformation. How the heck do you define those words?
Oh, that's an absolutely great question. I think that I like to keep things pretty simple to make it accessible to as many people as possible. And I think that when you think about digital products, a really great way to think about it is a product is anything that enables somebody to do something to achieve an outcome or a goal that they have. And so whether it's, your Uber app that's helping you connect so you can get from point A to point B and take a ride, or you're investing into some sort of enterprise piece of software, you're doing it, and by that software, you're able to accomplish something you otherwise would not be able to do. And that's where products come in. And sometimes is a lot of confusion around what is a product versus, but I have a website. Well, is my website a product? Depends on what type of website you've created. Are you trying to persuade somebody to do something? That's marketing. Are you trying to actually empower and enable people to do something? Then you're dealing with product. And so it's important to have a clear sense of those definitions, because the processes, the disciplines, and the practices that you follow in order to deliver on that are extremely different. Here's the interesting thing about digital transformation from my perspective. You're now talking about 2 layers of definition that I think are really important to understand. Digital transformation can mean very different things. So are you transforming your business model, the way that you actually deliver value to your customers, through transformation? Are you using it to empower and enable employees and change the way that they work and the way that you engage or facilitate that? Those are very different things. And so transformation is really about the broader business, evolution that is maximizing the value that technology can bring to it versus the actual product itself. And so it becomes this very large and encompassing practice that is also really important to be able to keep distinct and separate from maybe what you're doing with a singular product.
The whole idea of digital transformation for a second, going down the product route, and changing how you're in engaging and working with clients. Doesn't that by nature then also mean that you have to do something on the other side of that wall where, the people that are actually doing the work and how they organize to do it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if you're focused on innovating the customer experience and delivering, digital products and services, you equally need to be focused on how you do that internally, how you think about how do you empower and enable employees to deliver on that customer experience and those promises making to your market. It's interesting. There's usually two major roles or categories, if you will, that you need to think about on that side. One is deliberately facilitating the actual function of the product or service that are making that possible. And then what are the enabling services and products that exist inside the organization to make that possible? And so, that's a lot where you get into employee engagement, optimizing your operations and your systems and your processes in order to make that delivery of your product or service possible. And so both things need to be taking place on the behind the scenes to make sure that that's the best product experience possible.
So how does that happen? I mean, it's, obviously you come up with a strategy, but the world is incredibly dynamic. Is it possible to create a strategy these days and pursue it for years, and then pivot? Or are we in a scenario where the world is just way too dynamic to have, a 100-year plan kind of approach?
I think it depends on a couple of factors. So before I get into them, I should say, I think strategy is absolutely mission critical to an organization. And the faster your industry moves, the more essential that strategy being clear and focused is in order to the success of that your business and to be able to stay relevant. And so, strategy does a few fundamental things that have to be done in a business. It helps you understand, when done correctly, what's the problem that you're solving and how are you focusing on the problem, because you can solve it or have a unique insight to solve that in some sort of way that provides a competitive advantage. You need to be able to understand the outcomes that you're focused on, and you need to be able to provide line of sight to that for every member of the team so that they are able to make critical decisions as they go through their areas of whether they're in the finance team or they're on the product team or they're in IT, sales, marketing. There needs a common understanding of these things and what you're working towards. And there's a lot of things that fall apart pretty quickly without it. With that, you start to have people working unintentionally against each other. Not everybody might have the same intent, but they don't understand what the actual goals are. They don't have line of sight. You have challenges of, are you actually delivering on the value for the customer that you intended? And are you actually developing solutions, team structures and environments, enabling technology that actually help you deliver that value systematically again and again internally? And strategy is the foundation to all that work. If you love adopting, management frameworks around goal setting, like in ours, strategy is the foundation for that work. And so I think what is the misnomer that can happen for a lot of organizations is that, well, strategy is this nice thing to have, but it's not a necessity. And I would argue against that. It's absolute necessity, but strategy you do once and then you march along. It's something that's episodic. It's something you have to be doing cyclically again and again and again. And how fast you move through that strategic process needs to be based on the velocity of your business and the industry that you serve.
How does an organization then align to that strategy and then dynamically operate against it?
So alignment is let's unpack alignment for a second then, because I think that's really important. Alignment is this thing that can easily be misunderstood, and it requires to understand, like, what are the pieces of alignment that make up a functioning organization and operating model. So we have individual alignment, which is really about understanding how your work matters, what we're doing, and how we make a difference, and the impact of that work. And everybody on a team, and how, when you're operational, need to know how they contribute, right? That's really important. Every manager will say, I want my team members to be engaged. I want them to be productive. that requires them having a clear understanding of how their work contribution matters to the organization. The other element of alignment is team alignment, which is all understanding with how we integrate and bring people's unique expertise, experiences, and perspective together to solve problems, to operationalize the different aspects of our business in order to provide, excellence in what we do. And so that is also an essential piece of alignment. The third is organizational alignment, which is really alignment of how everything ladders up to the company's vision, their strategic objectives, and how that aligns with the resources and capabilities that organization has. Another way to think about it is, how do we align the competency of an organization with the resources that are available to solve these problems or to deliver on that product value? And then the fourth thing is the organization and team and individual all aligned to deliver maximum value to the market, which means understanding your users' problems, the impact of those problems, and not being in love with the solution you're creating, but being in love with the problem you're solving for that market and being adaptive and iterating to solving that in the most effective way that you can. And so leaders have a responsibility to develop the foundational elements necessary, and strategy being one of those, to actually facilitate that path of alignment. If that's happening, when you start to look at the operational side and how you enable that, then you're able to provide crystal clear line of sight to how those operations directly serve creating the value for the customer. And that becomes the guiding light for all operational activity. And they understand very clearly, because they're aligned on the impact and contribution that is a necessity for the function of the business.
So how does that occur? Is that a top-down sort of push, or is that a organically building up?
Well, I think it has to start with the leadership team. I do believe that you need to build alignment from the top-down and bottom-up approach. They need to come together. And it really depends on what type of business are you in. And what I mean by that is, or maybe a better way to say it is, what stage of is your business in? Are you in a startup where it's very easy to maintain alignment if it's just, let's say, two of us decide to go out on a venture together, right? We can just, look at each other across a room and over a desk, and we can hash it out. We can have those conversations that create that alignment that's necessary. As an organization grows, the ability to maintain alignment and the necessary communication gets exponentially more complex. And so it is really important that we are transparent about these foundational pieces and that we're enabling decisions that are in alignment. So great strategy does provide us a decision framework for what we're doing. And that should always be in alignment with the decisions that we're making and moving us one step closer to the best of our abilities and with the knowledge that we have towards the end vision or end goal for the organization. And so that's really important that we're building that through line at all points. The larger and the more complex the organization, the further removed the leadership is, though, from the customer typically and the problems that are being solved. And so it's also equally important that those that are directly engaging your customer, those that are directly facilitating the value that you provide as an organization, is also a substantial contributor to feeding up that insight and that knowledge. And there is clear willingness and openness to let that information flow upstream through the organization to inform how leadership sees and views the world around them and how they can best serve that customer going forward in their market. And so it becomes a very critical partnership. It's an alliance, if you will, between those that are boots on the ground and those that are, trying to make the best decisions they can in those leadership roles, coming together and maintaining that alignment. And it is a practice that requires constant effort.
I'll come back to the constant effort because I think that's critical. But I would assume that good alignment with good strategy then enables or empowers either groups below the people setting that strategy all the way perhaps down to the team or individual level to actually be more empowered to make decisions. Is that a good assumption?
That's spot on. So absolutely, by developing alignment, every team member, especially with the larger the organization gets, should have more autonomy and should be empowered to make critical decisions. And so there has to be some sort of checks and balance in place. I mean, you can't have everything just be empowered. Everyone's empowered in all possible ways, right? And so I understand that there is a necessity for that. And so I think it's worth, calling out that, you've hired that person specifically to fill a role around some area of expertise. And so, we want to empower the decisions that's in alignment with their expertise. If we're not asking engineers to make finance decisions, we're asking them to make engineering decisions that solve and architect the product in the best possible way. Same as we're asking finance to make decisions as they're empowered. When things start to cross over, let's say we're going to make a change in the product that has a potential change to the way we actually capture monetization with the client, then that becomes a cross-functional decision that needs to be made, where there's it should be an automatic trigger to incite collaboration in the organization and facilitation. It should never be a siloed decision at that point. And so I think it's also really important, if you're building out great products, that you actually have clarity for the teams of who are the collaborators and stakeholders in these different critical flows and decisions that make your product valuable and possible.
Who owns that alignment to product?
Well, so the alignment to the product, I would say, again, this goes to the size of the organization. But if we typically, the foundation for all alignment with the CEO, because it starts with the vision for the company. And so that's really important. If you're large enough where maybe you have a chief product officer, that chief product officer is responsible then for ensuring that the product strategy is in alignment with the vision for the business. And then the actual, then that the alignment as it distributes down through the team, that continuity has to be maintained and protected at every level. And then there needs to be a natural feedback mechanism to inform leadership of actually what we're seeing or hearing is different. And so let's build continuity on that. I think there's another facet to this of creating alignment that also is really important to highlight, which is leadership has a responsibility that often goes unrecognized, which is when we're building an organization, we have responsibility as leaders to build that culture. That's relatively well understood. One of the pieces of that culture, though, is building what I would call a common language and understanding. And so let me unpack that for a second, because I think it's important. There's every industry, every type of business, we all have our own acronyms, right? Our own shorthand. So before we got started, you mentioned you were having a conversation around Scrum and, and Agile development later. Agile is one of these words that has lost some of its substance and meaning, right? And so depending on who you're talking to in the organization, Agile can mean very, very different things. The benefit in a really high-performing culture, when we think about a common language, is that when we talk about Agile, we all understand what everyone else means by Agile. And so that's really important. And you see some of the most high-performing, top-notch product teams in the world, what they do is they make sure that this shared language is something that's universal in the company. A lot of leaders, if they're seeing some struggles in their product teams, or they're seeing some struggles in their organization, that look at the common understanding. Because when you don't have that, we interpret things differently. And we may, even with the best of intentions, start doing different things. Different teams start working on different parts of their product or their area of focus, and come to find out it's wrong. And we create a tremendous amount of extra meetings and rework And we all love that. And we could have avoided that up front with a shared understanding. So about 10 years ago, I started doing interviews with CEOs and product leaders all over the world. And the one attribute of the best leaders that I saw everywhere that I talked to was that they all had a step of validation or verification in the way that they led. They explain a concept or something that is really important. And then they'll ask somebody something. A simple question is, well, what did you hear? Not to challenge them whether they were paying attention, just to make sure that they have a shared understanding, because that shared understanding becomes critical. And so that is an incredibly powerful piece. And it's a responsibility for leaders to build that practice into the organization. And it should be happening at every level. But it's the responsibility of leaders to establish that in the culture.
That's phenomenal. That's a good takeaway. It's interesting. I work with a lot of C-level execs, and I very honestly don't know that I see many people looking for that validation, at least not personally. Maybe they're doing it via their communications executives and things like that, but that, of course, is through filters. Why wouldn't that be just like, if you go to get your MBA, why wouldn't that be something that they tattoo on you somewhere? Get feedback.
They absolutely should. I can tell you where I believe the root of it is. I'm not saying it's the right answer, but here's my theory. It wasn't that long ago we went through a massive industrial revolution. And in that, the idea is we're going to create systemization. We're going to create a process. If I'm building a car, I'm going to do this part. You're going to put that bumper on. You're going to put those 4 screws on, and you're going to do that 1,000 times in a day. And it was very, very simple. We don't work in a world like that anymore. We work in a world where we are saying that the most valuable asset of any employee is their ability to solve problems and deliver value in every function and level of the organization. That requires a different way we think about the role of leadership. And so fundamentally, the way the academic side is teaching some of these skills, which a lot of them are still 100% amazing and necessary, there are nuances to what is happening in the most effective companies with the most effective leaders that have not made its way to academics yet. And I think that is one of those elements. It's really looking at when we look at and we're bringing people together to solve problems, look at what human behavior is. And when we have leaders who are then very successful because they can make really hard decisions, sometimes with very little information, they can move quickly, they're able to build, an organization, they can create momentum. This skill is not one that's being emphasized on. And it does cost, not just the people in the organization, but it can cost shareholder value, if that's something you focus on. My focus is on customer value, our ability, how fast can we turn customer value? Customer lifetime value, from my perspective, is the most important metric in any organization. And this gets in the way of us delivering that at a lower cost. And so it's really important that we start to build this shift from, kind of an industrial era way of leadership and thinking, and moving into very much an information age driven, way of collaboration.
So you've described the necessity for strategy, the necessity for alignment, working up and working down, a robust feedback loop, probably both ways, such that people stay on the right course. I could hear people argue that that's a lot of overhead. Why can't I just tell people what to do and just have them do it?
I understand the argument, but what's more overhead and work? To get aligned in place and to then be able to incrementally maintain it just by asking a question that could take no longer than a minute or two, or to go 6 months down the road, find out you were misaligned, expectations are missed, and now you have to start over.
Yeah, I do think that's the punchline, isn't it? And we've probably seen that a few times.
Yeah. I mean, that the challenge with these things is that it sounds like it's a lot of extra work. What I've seen and experienced firsthand is it's really not. What it does is it's actually an accelerant. And so when we do this, how often have any of us been in a meeting feeling like we're having the same conversation we had a week ago or a month ago? We've all been there. Well, why did it happen? Well, a lot of times it's because we were misaligned or something didn't get done, or we're still debating something. Well, but because we don't have a shared understanding of that thing. I used as example, the one I'd have to deal with the most is we're going to be customer centric. Well, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. Your vision isn't customer centric. Your values as a company aren't customer centric. Your metrics that you say are most important aren't customer centric. I mean, what does that mean in your context? Like, that's a mission critical thing. I've worked with a lot in healthcare over the last 20 years, and this is a real challenge for them. You're talking about, when you say I'm going to be patient centric, organizationally, it sounds phenomenal. And we all want to be taken care of as patients. And I have never met a nurse or practitioner that is not amazing. I mean, just with the best heart and intentions of helping the most people possible. But the environment and structure around them, when we say patient-centric, is grossly misunderstood. And I've seen it simplified to something as a net promoter score. That does not equate to being patient-centric because you got a good net promoter score. And so I use that as an example because the rework aspect of what we talk about, or when we build alignment and we're really clear, it goes back to this idea of how do I enable the organization, the operational side, that line of sight, that clarity, the way that they make decisions, the way they choose to operate, that is coming from the actual genuine intention of the leadership team. It's explicit. And ambiguity is extremely difficult. And there's a million books that have been written out there, and people 10 times smarter than me that talk about the most important thing in any organization can be focus. Well, how can you focus if everybody doesn't understand what the terminology you use in your business means? And so this ability to build alignment, I think, is actually one of the greatest multipliers of organizational performance any organization can actually put in place almost immediately. And it's like anything, it's a muscle, it's discipline. It's something you build up over time and then you maintain it. And once you can, your team is capable of doing not just the extraordinary things they're doing today, but unbelievably extraordinary things in the future.
I'm pretty sure that as you built Emerge, you leveraged these ideas. What is it that you learned by actually building your own company that then now translates into the work that you do with other organizations?
Well, so just on this topic alone, I can say one of the most important things that I've experienced firsthand in building Emerge is the power of creating empowered and autonomous teams. And so that's one of the big values that we provide to our clients is when they need a product team to come in or a specialist to come in, whether it be through product discovery and strategy work or maybe product or in engineering work, we're able to create these teams that can work and integrate with our clients seamlessly. And one of the foundations of that work that we do is getting line of sight. What's the vision? What's the intended outcome that we're shooting for? And then what's the common language that we need to start building? Because that determines how fast we can contribute to their effort. And so we put a big focus on that. And we've been able to pressure test that in our own organization, hundreds of times. And so that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it, because I not only have seen it working with our clients, I see it in my own team. and their ability to do the work that they do and to have a safe place and that allows them to be creative and solve problems and to know that they are supported because we have a foundation of that common understanding and when we make it a point. And when things get off track, we take it very seriously. We put real attention into redefining that, or we have a new team member that challenges it, the way that we think about a definition. We don't say, well, no, that's the way we do it here. Our first question is more. Because the second part for us is that we're in a continuous learning environment at Emerge. And when you're hiring experts to come in and provide, the types of things that we do in product, we have to be constantly learning. And that has to be ingrained into everybody that's part of our team. And so we recognize that and we really promote that type of constant learning and that feedback mechanism because we know that's absolutely the key for us to create value for our customers. And so we live it. We don't just talk about it.
How do you maintain is probably the wrong word, but how do you make sure that culture lives, grows, and really stays where it's at or where it needs to be at Emerge?
So for me, I put a lot of my time into my leadership team, making sure that there's, and I have a feedback mechanism with everybody on that team. I want to make sure that they're really clear about the vision for the company. That is, we talk about it every week. We talk about how that is aligned with our objectives. Are those, and we're cross-checking. Is this still the right objective? Are we still focused on the right things here? What's changed? What's moving on? I could use examples of, what's going on with AI now, or, when we saw things happen with Silicon Valley Bank a few weeks ago. There's all these things that are constantly happening around us. Do they really change the trajectory of anything that we need to be focused on? Are we focusing on that thing because it's urgent or because it's important? And there's a big difference. And so when I work with my leadership team, I'm really making sure and having that continuous feedback loop and then that reinforcement so that as they work with their teams, we're ensuring there's continuity. And instead of me directing, and it kind of creates, if you ever, as a kid, I don't know if you ever played like the telephone game and, stuff goes around all of a sudden, it's something completely different. That happens in organizations all the time. And so we avoid that by bringing ourselves together, into and making sure that one, we have the method of communication, and then two, how we facilitate bringing teams and cross-functional teams together in order to eliminate that from happening. And it's all by intention. I think the other key thing for me personally, is that when I really, work with my team, what I want to encourage is that I'm there to support them. I work for my team. They don't work for me. So it's important for me that I actually spend time not just working with my leadership team, but I actually, I shadow every facet of the business as often as I can. And I think getting frontline perspective so I can ask better questions that's a critical part of my feedback mechanism as a leader. And that was something that I learned from other leaders at companies that are much, much bigger that put in time in the field or in their retail stores to close the gap between what they're focused on in the leadership role to actually the connection that's made with their customers. And so that's always a really important, thing that I keep to heart as I work through anything.
Jonathan, this has gone a lot differently than I thought it would. We went to a lot of different places. Before we break, if you woke up tomorrow morning, someone handed you whatever your caffeinated beverage of choice is and a magic wand and gave you two wishes that you could change any two things impacting the world of digital products, what would they be and why?
Gosh, that's a great question. Well, after probably an excessive amount of espresso, which is definitely my go-to, if I could wave a magic wand on what to change in product, I think one thing off the very top would be is this is a bit philosophical, but you asked, so I'm going to answer it honestly, is I think it would be phenomenal if more people could come to the table with a greater sense of vulnerability so we could work on work that matter most. And so I really enjoy in product getting to the root of problems. And that takes there's just a lot of layers of stuff to dig through before we can really get there. And we all have a way that we want to be perceived or seen in the world, or, professional kind of, boundaries we need to establish. And I think all those need to be respected. But at the same time, sometimes we just have to admit when we're afraid or we're uncertain, or, we don't know how to solve this problem. And that's a very hard thing to do in a professional setting, especially if it's a very competitive environment in an area where you're expected to be a high performer. But I think that vulnerability allows you to be a high performer. It allows you to see which workers can lift you up and who can help you. And it allows you to see those who are going to be the best to really dig into that work and really contribute. And so that would be one thing I'd love to see more for the industry, is more vulnerability. The second, honestly, is just more alignment. I think we focus on outputs over outcomes and value so much in the product industry. And I think there's a lot of waste in software, and there's a lot of failure in software, and failure being not just products that fail, but things that are underperforming. They're not actually serving the purpose or intent that we intended. And I think if we could focus on alignment, we could start to see a lot more impactful and high performing products that are creating more value in the world. And I'm a big believer that technology is one of the greatest assets we have to help people. And so I would love to see more of that value creation focus happening for users.
How could people continue the conversation? How could they find out about you and Emerge?
Absolutely. Would love to have anybody come visit us at emergeinteractive.com. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, and pick up alignment. You can check out the book on Amazon.
And by the way, at least today, I noticed that the Kindle version is 99 cents. So probably
it is. Yeah, we just started a new promotion, and so that's a
Wow.
limited time. But so the timing is perfect if anybody's interested.
Well, super. I bought a copy, so only got a couple of pages in before our interview, so that's why we didn't go down that line too hard. Jonathan, this has been absolutely fantastic. Anything else that you'd like to promote before you go? You've shared a ton of information and some really, I think, penetrating views in terms of how leaders should act, and how alignment and having the right strategy actually empower people to actually get the job done and get it done well.
Well, the only thing I can add is if the topic of alignment, and especially around building product strategy in this time to value, is something that any of your listeners are really focused on at the moment, I would encourage them to reach out to me. I do a free assessment of customer lifetime value and evaluating, is your strategy aligned to your intended vision for the company? And I love having those conversations. It's completely free. And so it's just an opportunity for me to connect with more great people and hopefully create some of that value that I'm focused on for others. So that's definitely an opportunity for anybody listening.
Super. And again, Jonathan Hensley, CEO and founder of Emerge Interactive. Thank you again for being here and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
In Reread Saturday News. Hey, first things second. Help me pick the next batch of books to be reread. Pick 2 books from the poll in the show notes, or email me at tcagley@tomcagley.com if you have a different suggestion. Back to first things. We completed our reread of Team Topologies this week. If you have or ever will have any input into how teams are formed and maintained, you need to read this book at least once. P.S. Buy a copy because you're not getting mine. Links in the show notes to this week's installment of Reread Saturday and the previous 10 in the Team Topologies Reread. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast number 761, we will continue our exploration of critical thinking. In this installment, we will examine several of the attributes of critical thinking. We'll also have a visit from the QA Corner. Mr. Barrio brings his wisdom to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?